Now that you're changing, I want you to see just how unimportant they are. So she does. Kirk tries to reason with her and bring her back, but her responses show exactly what Mitchell was hoping for. It's a kind of logic that comes from a strong sense of the insignificance of others and the greatness of themselves. And she explains, and then I copied out this whole section because it's such a dense and compelling dialogue. She says, Earth really is unimportant. Before long, we'll be where it would have taken mankind millions of years of learning to reach. And then Kirk responds, and what will Mitchell learn in getting there? Will he know what to do with his power? Will he acquire the wisdom? And he's cut off. She interrupts him and says, please go back while you still can. And he says, did you hear him joke about compassion? Of all else, a god needs compassion. Mitchell! So Kirk just referenced two very important things. Number one, the importance of moral growth and growth in wisdom that is in keeping with the pacing of your growth in power. This was the problem that the episode Charlie X focused on. Charlie was growing up, but he had too much power, and he ended up creating situations that neither the crew nor he actually wanted. Because we as humans, we need to be teenagers with limited power, with our power or our skills or our capacities growing slowly and gradually in proportion to our opportunity to learn how to use them without self-destructing. Charlie didn't have that opportunity, so he became a monster. He became a person who continually gave other people the reason to fear him, and who ultimately ended up just being chronically angry and unhappy, like a little kid who grew up without any rules. So first off, Kirk referenced the need to learn and grow gradually and slowly at a pace commensurate with gradual increases in power. And then Kirk says in this very emphatic, pivotal moment, he draws a very special amount of attention to the idea of compassion. He says, of all else, a god needs compassion. This is especially relevant because Mitchell has associated himself with the Judeo-Christian God, who has a special distinctiveness by association with love and compassion. Many polytheistic deities are driven by various things like lust, greed, vindictiveness, etc. My guess is you'd probably be more likely to find a compassionate goddess than a god in most pantheons, though I'm not familiar enough with the polytheistic religions to make any broad statements on that. But my impression is that generally speaking, compassion would be an occasional and not a relatively important quality within most pantheons. But Mitchell wasn't comparing himself earlier on to the gods of the Greek and Roman pantheons. He was comparing himself to the Judeo-Christian God. And I tend to think that it's probably in that capital G kind of sense, the sense of the transcendent ultimate kind of God. I think it's probably in that kind of sense that Kirk says, of all else, a god needs compassion. And it's interesting, most of the time Star Trek, up to the 90s, for the most part, Star Trek tends to be very anti-religion, just in general. But there are 3 Star Trek TOS references that I've noticed that seem to show a little bit of positive regard for religion and particularly for Christianity. The clearest of those is the episode Bread and Circuses, which portrays Christian belief as something that emerges naturally in the evolution of parallel worlds, and in which Christians are peaceful people who value nonviolence and live by an ethic of love, and who end up bravely facing persecution at the hands of the dominant culture, but without responding in hatred or violence. That's the first one. The second one is the episode Who Mourns for Adonais, in which Kirk rejects the claims of the Apollo alien by saying, mankind has no need for gods. We find the one quite adequate, implying that monotheism is not necessarily incompatible with the kinds of things that are in view there. Now, apparently that reference to the one God being enough was apparently added after the writing of the story as part of an attempt to please the censors at NBC. So it probably doesn't reflect the sentiments of the writing team, but it's still interesting to think about simply because of how much sense it does and doesn't make in that immediate and extended context. But anyway, the third item I would suggest is this reference right here. Kirk isn't implying that there is a God. All of Star Trek is quite clear that the God of Christianity definitely doesn't exist. But Kirk is here appealing to one of the parts of Christianity that stands out as meaningful from a humanistic Star Trek perspective. The idea that if there was a really, really big God, or especially if there was an omnipotent God like in Christianity, a God needs to have compassion. Regardless of the truth or untruth of such a faith, I think the writers are assuming that's the kind of mythology that we would need. Humans need to see the transcendent ultimate as being power wedded with compassion, greatness with goodness, ultimate power with ultimate love. That's the kind of ideal that we need to admire and imitate. We need that because if we admire as ultimate mere power without love, that's never going to get us to the kind of pro-social, benevolent, humanist morality that we need so badly. Anyway, so Kirk says, did you hear him joke about compassion? Of all else, a god needs compassion. And then Dehner shoots back. What do you know about gods? And Kirk says, then let's talk about humans, about our frailties. As powerful as he gets, he'll still have all that inside him. She says, go back. And then he grabs a hold of her and he says, you were a psychiatrist once. You know the ugly, savage things we all keep buried that none of us dare expose. But he'll dare. Who's to stop him? He doesn't need to care. Be a psychiatrist for 1 minute longer. What do you see happening to him? What's your prognosis, doctor? And then she turns and says, he's coming. And Kirk snaps to and he looks around. And then he turns to her and says, then watch him. Hang on to being a human for 1 minute longer.